sreći voditi u zraku, u pjesmi strojeva i u sjaju žita. Rasti i cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srcem Tita. Rasti i cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srcem
Good morning, everybody, and welcome along. It is the morning of the 1st of October 2024, and you join us today for the first of two live streams, the first of which, of course, is now dealing with the question of psychological warfare, and the next will be at 7:45 in the evening, looking at Stalin's work at the 14th Congress of the CPSU. So, the subject of psychological warfare is, of course, one which is discussed often in the online world, but I want to give you my own analysis of it today and perhaps get away from some of the more hysterical readings of it. Now, I'm going to be citing from two Chinese sources of wisdom today, one of which is Mao, but that will come later. The first of which comes from this. If you can see that, that's called Six Secret Teachings. It's part of a collection I got with the Art of War by Sun Tzu. And I think this is a good way to start it, considering we'll be going into Mao on guerrilla warfare later on. But I want to start with this. Therefore, he who works for the good of the world is welcomed by all the people of the world. He who causes all the people of the world to suffer is opposed by all the people of the world. He who brings misfortune to the people of the world will be resisted by the people of the world. He who kills the people of the world will be hated by the people of the world. He who conforms to the will of the people of the world will be obeyed by the people of the world. He who causes poverty to the people of the world will be despised by the people of the world. He who makes the people of the world live and work in peace and happiness will be relied upon by the people of the world. He who brings distress to the people of the world will be considered as a bane by the people of the world. So, the reason I read that out is because it sets up well our discussion today, which is on psychological warfare and its necessity. And I think that ancient piece of Chinese wisdom is applicable to understanding this particular case. Because what the ancient writer, it's an unnamed work actually, says there is broadly true. And of course this has these writings have had their influence on the Chinese Communist Party to this day. If you are, as the US imperialists are, in a position where you are manifestly making the life of the great majority in the world over whom you have domination objectively worse, then you need to engage in all manner of subtlety and tricks in order to get away with this, which is where, of course, the psychological operations or psychological warfare comes in. Now, of course, there are complexities here. And I'm thinking specifically, and this is what has inspired this episode, of the case of Lebanon on the recent assassination of Hassan Nasrallah and other senior Hezbollah commanders. For a country like Lebanon, or any country which is dominated by US imperialism, you need to be able to control it. And one of the ways in which you control it is, of course, what we've discussed here many times, which is the usage of compradors, which is the usage of an elite, the elements in the ruling class and the intelligentsia, who are bound to US imperialism by either shared class interests, i.e. those elements in the ruling class whose interests go in terms of doing business with or in the West, or who want to keep their money in the West, and those in the intelligentsia who are either straight up employees of US imperialism, as the Lebanese central bank governor was for many years, or who are ideologically brought over to the point of view of US imperialism, who have become convinced of the superiority of imperialism, which is, of course, what Frantz Fanon deals with, both in Wretched of the Earth and in Black Skin, White Masks. The colonized subject who becomes convinced of the superiority of his colonizer. So those are two of the principal ways in which US imperialism seeks to, of course, get over what the ancient Chinese writer is discussing there, which is how do you avoid, when you are a force in the world which is objectively making so many people's lives worse, how do you avoid the consequences of being despised? And part of the way in which you do this is you divide up, of course, the forces that oppose you. And there is the role of the comprador bourgeoisie, there's the role of the compromised and colonized intelligentsia. So if you control or exercise control over the people who carry a lot of the economic weight in a country, and if you control, either through direct employment or ideological control, the intelligentsia, the ideas people, the leadership class in a society, then you have gone a long way to controlling it. And this is, of course, part of the basis of neocolonialism, as outlined by Kwame Nkrumah, in that you don't need necessarily to engage in direct military occupation, which is costly and risky, if you can control a state which is nominally independent, but over which you can exercise domination through control of the comprador ruling class and the intelligentsia and the political sphere, and of course dominating the cultural sphere. This is another area that US imperialism has excelled in. So in those ways you divide the forces that are against you, and this is something which, of course, the Marxists in the 20th century spent a lot of time grappling with, that Stalin theorized about, that Mao especially grappled with in the Chinese Revolution. And the compradors are all still there in the what's referred to as the axis of resistance to this day. They are always present. And they are always present because, of course, not only is capitalism still present, but the linkage to Western capital is still there, even if the imperialists themselves have severed many of these linkages. So how does this relate to psychological warfare and the assassination of Nasrallah? Well, if we examine the way the information space has been managed since the assassination of Nasrallah, it is quite interesting to see what the US imperialists are clearly trying to achieve. And I say the US imperialists because now it is absolutely essential to just name what is going on here accurately. There's no more point to talking of Israel, because as Nasrallah himself and the other revolutionaries in West Asia understand, Israel is nothing without the empire that ultimately creates and supports it. The Israel was created in this. I mean, we've gone over this territory many times before, but just briefly, it's created to be an expression of the power of the British Empire in West Asia, to divide and conquer the Arab peoples, the Arab people. And this is why US imperialism takes it over and runs it to this day. Israel, this tiny place with very few natural resources, with on the edge of the Mediterranean, with a relatively small population, only survives to this day because it is a colonial project overseen by US imperialism. And that's what Israel is. And if US imperialism turns off the money or the weapons tap or any of the other support that it provides Israel on a daily basis, then there is no Israel anymore. Those bunker buster bombs which they dropped on on South Beirut to kill Nasrallah and the other Hezbollah leaders, those bombs, of course, came from the USA. The planes that dropped them were designed in the USA. The politician who leads Israel is a US citizen. Let's not forget that. So Netanyahu, of course, is a functionary of the US imperialists. So, as I said, he's a US citizen. He is a colonial prime minister, and all this talk that goes on about, Biden's not happy with Netanyahu, Lloyd Austin's not happy with the Israelis, all that kind of stuff. This is a show that's put on. No, there's no maybe about it. They would prefer a slightly more effective salesman in the West than Netanyahu. But again, this is a question of the preservation of the power of US imperialism via preserving Israel and keeping Israel as a powerful military encampment in the region, which is all it is. It is a large military encampment in the region whose purpose is to terrorize and brutalize and reinforce the divisions in the Arab world. That's what the British designed it to be, and it's what it remains. So, to go back to the psychological aspects of this, I was observing the way in which the assassination of Nasrallah has been presented in the West, and of course it is, presented in a joyous fashion by the US and the British bourgeois press and others, because of course they understand, or at least those who are feeding them the stories understand, that Hezbollah is a powerful opponent of imperialism, in not just in terms of its opposition to the colonial state of Israel, but also because of its opposition to the Comprador forces in Lebanon. Hezbollah is a powerful force that is able to exercise a degree of control over certain areas in Lebanon. It is essentially, in some areas, a state within a state. It is the only force really capable of leading a genuine popular front for national liberation in Lebanon. And for all these reasons, US imperialism has, from its point of view correctly, identified it as a big danger to their control of Lebanon, which is, of course, a very strategic place. Now, to go back to the psychological aspects, the Israelis took a big hit to their psychological warfare power on October the 7th last year, which is, I think, part of what October the 7th was designed to do, was to damage the Israeli myth of invincibility. And what they're trying to do with the assassination of Nasrallah is they are trying to reestablish that idea that Israel, in reality the US, let's just say for what it is, that the US is so powerful that they can get you anywhere, that their technology is, that their spy tech and their scientific power is such that they can find anyone anywhere and eliminate them, and you will never see it coming. This is the psychological effect that they wish to have upon people. And you could see it, the way that they were pushing it. They also want to, of course, seek to cause as much division and confusion within the axis of resistance as possible by repeatedly pushing the point about Iran has abandoned Iran has abandoned Hezbollah, etc. Iran has betrayed the axis of resistance, that kind of thing, capitalizing on some real divisions that do exist, but amping them up to the max. Then you see other people, some of whom are brainless, some of whom are mendacious in the online world, going on and on and on about how Iran has betrayed this, that, or the other, which is doing the enemy's work for it. Let's just call it for what it is. Some of these people in this online space are pro-Zionist. Let's just call that for what it is. Some of whom are just idiots. But they're playing into the game of the US propaganda here. And the aim of assassinating Nasrallah is to try and re-establish the idea of US omnipotence, which got severely damaged by October the 7th. But I think we, of course, should not fall for this game. The game is to, of course, make everybody feel as confused and weak and powerless as possible. If your enemy is so powerful and has such an advanced technology that it can assassinate you at the click of a button and it doesn't even need to come anywhere near you to do so, it does breed a certain feeling of fear and vulnerability. Of course, this is a myth. The more we will find out about how they actually managed to assassinate Nasrallah, you'll find that the reality was it was a combination of old-fashioned spycraft, some of the oldest in the world, which is having extensive intelligence networks inside Lebanon, which we know that the US imperialists do, and also by having people around key Hezbollah sites to be able to spy on them. I mean, this is stuff that's as old as spycraft itself. The technology's gone forward, but without those people on the ground, there is no great US spy machine. This is why the Israelis and the US got caught out so badly on October the 7th. Hamas has in Gaza, partially thanks to the US and the Israelis turning it into a prison, had managed to either flip or eliminate most of the human intelligence assets inside Gaza, meaning that the information that was coming into this supposedly almighty US-Israeli intelligence machine, feeding into these great supposedly AI, not really AI, data processing banks, was garbage. So to use an old phrase, garbage in, garbage out. And Hamas had made sure that what was getting fed into the Israeli machine was garbage. And that's why they caught them out. It's quite simple. You eliminate the human sources, or you make sure that the human sources are only feeding in garbage, and you get around the supposedly all-powerful US intelligence machine. This is why I say technology, when it comes to espionage, is a supplemental thing. It can be an important supplemental thing. If you have good information and you can process a lot of good information using advanced IT systems, then that's good. But if you're feeding it in crap, then the only thing that's going to come out the other end is crap. And Hamas realized this. Of course, it's a much more difficult thing for Hezbollah because Hamas controlled the entirety of Gaza, and to a large extent still do. Whereas Hezbollah, of course, sit within a country which is fatally compromised by the presence of imperialism in the country. Now, to go back to the psychological aspect of this, what is the commonality between psychological warfare waged on colonized peoples and psychological warfare in the imperial core? The psychological warfare waged on the colonized peoples is trying to do exactly what the advertising, should we say, for this assassination of Nasrallah is attempting. And you can see this clearly in the way it is reported upon and the way that it is talked about. To go back to Frantz Fanon analyzes how the colonizer tries to repeatedly impress upon the colonized subject the idea of that they are all-powerful and that they are so technologically and civilizational-wise superior to the colonized peoples that the colonized peoples cannot ever hope to win. This was something that, again, the French were doing, the British were doing. If you observe the British in India, they had a very interesting and devious set of strategies for convincing the colonized peoples of British superiority, which partially was about buying off for the intellectual elite in India, partially about using advanced technology to commit acts of brutalization. Similar practice is being waged here by the US. Will all this talk of like the invincible spy tech, this is a colonial management method to convince those who try to oppose US imperialism they can't possibly oppose it because the technology is too advanced. You can't possibly beat us. That's what they want to do with this. But by analyzing it properly, we can see that in actual fact, their technology is rendered useless without proper human material, shall we say. And that's an important aspect to bear in mind. Again, we go back to the psychological element of it. So you want to, as a colonizer, impart within the mind of the colonized the idea that if you are too technologically inferior to win, Now, of course, that is untrue. If technological superiority was the guiding principle here, it was that it always guaranteed a win for the colonizer, then the British Empire would still exist, but it doesn't. Not in the same way, anyway. If it was technological superiority which won the day, the French would still rule Vietnam and Algeria and Laos and Cambodia. You get the picture. In the end, Mao's dictum of that imperialism is a paper tiger is correct. It is correct. That and again, all of the guerrilla warfare waged for the purposes of national liberation throughout the 20th century shows that that was correct. In the end, imperialism couldn't resist because to do so would play upon its fundamental contradictions. The central of those, most central of those, is the weak relationship that it has with the masses. Now, to go back to the beginning of our presentation here, and when we're talking from the Six Secret Teachings, reading from the Six Secret Teachings, if you are running a system which does not work for the good of the majority, if you're running a system which impoverishes the majority, then you have a real problem if you're going to try and mobilize them in warfare. You can trick them, you can lie to them, you can fill their heads with propaganda for a while. But again, material reality will catch up with you. And again, material reality caught up with the US imperialists in Korea. It caught up with them in a severe way in Vietnam. And they've never really got over that. Now, if we go back to the First World War, you can see the impact of the divisions within the working class there and how that played out, and how initially the imperialists were able to convince a significant element of the working class to fight and die on their behalf, but how that ran out after about 3 years. And in reality was getting them into trouble after less than one in the British case. Because what they were able to do in the case of World War One was they were able to secure this mass mobilization of the working class, because the leadership layer of the working class, I don't just mean the Labour Party and social democratic leaders, the traitors of the Second International, but the upper elements of the working class, the Labour aristocracy, had, of course, adopted a pro-imperialist point of view because they were, as Cecil Rhodes said they should, directly profiting from imperialism at that stage. And so these people this layer was brought over to a pro-imperialist position. Material reality, though, bit them after years of destructive warfare that they were being used by the ruling class. And this, of course, you started to see mutinies in the French and the British Army in 1916 and 1917. And this, of course, increases the paranoia and suspicion of the ruling class, and is one of the big reasons why the British ruling class were unwilling to go to war in 1939. They didn't want to do it because they remembered the instability that was triggered from the First War. And again, all the psychological warfare in the world can't beat material reality. And to go back to Mao's point, the weakness is the weak relationship with the masses, and it's even weaker now. It's even weaker now because the number of people who actually benefit from British imperialism now is shrinking. The concessions that they made to the working class have long been withdrawn or eroded. And now the imperialists are facing two regional wars in Ukraine and now in West Asia, that they are trying to cling on in both, trying to preserve their domination in both places, and can't. And this is the reason why they are still terrified of doing any kind of draft. Because, again, you can encourage through the bourgeois press all kinds of division. You can encourage racism. You can encourage all kinds of civilizational supremacist delusions. But again, you can't beat material reality. And for the British ruling class, I mean, they're now openly worried about the fact that they can't do. They know that they can't do call-ups. They can't do drafts because it would create a massive amount of instability. What you'd end up with is a rebellion, and the rebellion would first of all come from the elements in the middle class and the the better off elements in the working class would be the first to rebel these days. The poor, the very poorest, might sign up for a while, but they would rebel too, because again, there's no benefit coming to them anymore. And again, the material reality can't be escaped. The weakness is their lack of relationship with the masses, and the fact that they are openly despise and have contempt for the masses. British imperialism has reached the end of its lifespan. It is clinging on basically through inertia now. It is only still in place because no force has emerged to push it out of the way. So that means this is the reason why they, of course, have to constantly go in for psychological warfare. They constantly have to keep the forces of the working class divided amongst themselves. They constantly have to reinforce inside the working class domestically feelings of alienation, feelings of isolation and fear. Go back to the wider picture about what the imperialists try and do to colonize peoples. They try and put it into the mind of the colonized peoples that all resistance is completely impossible. That the forces of the imperialists are simply too technologically and therefore civilizationally powerful to resist. Go back to we then revert to the domestic situation. What is it they are trying to do there? It's the same thing, but on a slightly different level. They try to convince you that all confrontation with the employers, with the government, with the wider ruling class is impossible to win. That you can never unite the working class around a common objective. That there can be never any such thing as shared interests amongst the working class. That there's all these divisions, religious, cultural, sexual, anything you care to imagine. That they will spend an awful lot of time and money in the hired prostitute press, reinforcing all of these divisions, and not just through like the press in terms of news media, in terms of culture, in terms of the way they present things to people. Every single thing that they do is designed only around reinforcing divisions within the working class. That is the guiding principle of imperialist propaganda, making you feel alone, making you feel, of course, completely alienated, and making you feel that all resistance is completely impossible. This is the commonality of the propaganda. This is the commonality of the psychological warfare. They want to keep people in the imperial core countries permanently unstable, or constantly looking over their shoulders for either the dead hand of the state, which is going to come down upon them if they express any kind of defiance. And this is why they are constantly ramping up the repressive laws. It's not that they didn't have the ability to arrest just about anybody for anything beforehand. In the British case, they always did. There's always been ultra repressive laws on the books. They just don't use them quite a lot of the time. But they put more and more repressive laws on the books because they want more and more ways to arrest and intimidate people. That's the reason why all these laws are ultimately here. So the common factor is to try and prevent any form of liberation movement emerging by making the masses feel disempowered and dividing the masses as well. There's still elements in the imperial core countries who gain some benefit from imperialism, elements within the uppermost end of the working class and certainly the petty bourgeoisie, but these are increasingly small. Increasingly, the great mass of the working class is ever more impoverished as imperialism continues to degenerate. And all it has left now is psychological tricks. But again, this is part of the reason why they haven't gone marching off to war against the Russians, or why they haven't gone marching off to war against the Iranians, because that would necessitate a break up in this in this delicate series of psychological operations that they're running. If you suddenly hit the people you're running your psyop on with the brutal material reality that either they or their children have to go and march off and die in huge numbers, then your psyop isn't going to work in the same way anymore. And they're very worried that if that happens, then they'll face mass resistance, which they know the system is too brittle to actually withstand. So it's kept in place, really, by, again, constantly causing division, but also never placing the shall we say the very, very frayed and ragged social contract that still just about exists, never putting that to the test through the level of warfare you saw in World War One and World War Two, because it couldn't survive that. That's the truth. If the imperialists march off to war against Russia, against China, against Iran, then that social contract is not going to survive, because the imperialists would not win those wars. They wouldn't. The system is too corroded. The industrial base that they would need to win those wars is simply not there. So this is a question of for those who are in the oppressed nations realizing their own potential power. And here I want to bring in a quote from Mao on guerrilla warfare, because this applies to the Lebanese, it applies to the Iraqis, it applies to all of the nations in West Asia who are subject to oppression by US imperialism and also rule by comprador. So here I'll read to you from, this is page 68 on guerrilla warfare. So we'll start here. China is a country half colonial and half feudal. It is a country that is politically, militarily, and economically backward. This is an inescapable conclusion. It is a vast country with great resources and tremendous population. A country in which the terrain is complicated and the facilities for communication are poor. All these factors favour a protracted war. They all favour the application of mobile warfare and guerrilla operations. The establishment of innumerable anti-Japanese bases behind the enemy's lines will force him to fight unceasingly in many places at once, both to his front and his rear. He thus endlessly expends his resources. We must unite the strength of the army with that of the people. We must strike the weak spots in the enemy's flanks, in his front, in his rear. We must make war everywhere and cause dispersal of his forces and dissipation of his strength. Thus the time will come when a gradual change will become evident in the relative position of ourselves and our enemy, and when that day comes, it will be the beginning of our ultimate victory over the Japanese. Although China's population is great, it is unorganized. This is a weakness which must be taken into account. The Japanese bandits have merely to conquer territory. The Japanese bandits have invaded our country not merely to conquer territory, but to carry out the violent, rapacious, and murderous policy of their government, which is the extinction of the Chinese race. For this compelling reason, we must unite the nation without regard to parties or classes and follow our policy of resistance to the end. So, the point that Mao's making there, and he's making the point about guerrilla warfare, is twofold. Firstly, in the case of all oppressed nations, when waging guerrilla warfare and upon a more advanced nation, and in the case of the Arab peoples, they will ultimately be waging a war against U.S. imperialism. In the case of the Lebanese, in the case of Hezbollah, you've already got like a powerful army and movement there that has already defeated Israel twice, forced them out of most of Lebanon in 2000, and then beat them in 2006. And the guerrilla wins by being still standing at the end of the fight and forcing open the contradictions in the enemy society, which is what has been happening over the course of the last year. And it's the reason why, of course, the October the 7th operation was ultimately a success. It was ultimately a success because despite the unbelievable levels of brutality inflicted by the Israelis upon the Palestinian population, they are still unable to meet their objectives, the objectives outlined by chief imperial functionary Netanyahu. And these are objectives, of course, that are cooked up with his masters in Washington directly. So they are unable to do this. They have had their settler population in the north evacuated. And this is part of the reason why they ultimately went for the assassination of Nasrallah. Because if the writ of the Israeli regime does not run in the north of the country anymore, if they can't secure the north of the country, the north of occupied Palestine, then they have lost. This is the essential truth of the situation facing the US imperialists. If the Israeli colonial project can't return the settlers to the north, which means they have to either compel a peace deal upon Hezbollah, which they were trying to do, but Nasrallah and the other Hezbollah leaders refused, and that is why they were killed. But if they can't do that, if they can't force a settlement in the north, then the Israeli colonial regime is going to become more and more unstable. Might not collapse tomorrow, but it's becoming more and more unstable because hundreds of thousands of its own residents can't return to their homes. And this, again, to go back to Mao's point about exhausting the resources of the enemy. Hezbollah's stance over the last year, which has been a consistent and persistent exchange of fire with the Israeli regime, going to the point where the Israeli regime had to evacuate hundreds of thousands and stick them down south in various camps and hotels, is not only draining this colonial state of resources, it's persistently destabilizing it. And again, like you see from people in not just in the West, but you see this in some certain Russians as well, who are enamored with that fraud Dugin, like babbling on about. I saw Dugin raving away the other day about how Israel had the advantage because it's fast and decisive and brutal. Just shows just how much of an idiot people like Dugin really are when it comes down to it, because they have this vision of warfare as basically like a Wagnerian opera, which is very much influenced actually not by Soviet and Russian military doctrine, but by the military doctrine of the imperialists and specifically the Nazis, because this was the Nazi method of war. It's also the imperialist method of war writ large, which is act hard, act quick, act brutally, and act with the greatest level of destruction possible. I mean, that's what 20 years ago, that's what the shock and awe campaign was about. To go back to the psychological element here, it was about these gigantic explosions, these gigantic munitions that they dropped on Baghdad. Was it really about actually defeating the Iraqi forces? Not really, because even though you can cause a lot of destruction, but you can not damage the enemy's fighting capacity all that much. I mean, what really defeated with the Iraqi forces was the fact that the Iraqi state itself was weak and poorly organized. The Iraqi forces themselves could have put up a much better fight if they'd been better motivated and better led, but that's another story. The huge destruction at the shock and awe campaign, I mean, the answer's in the title for this as to what its intentions were. What it was there to do was to carry out that demoralization element, which we were talking about before, the common element between the psychological warfare that takes place on those who are the subjects within the colonial core countries, the imperial core countries, and those who are subjected to imperialism, which is to make you feel like you cannot possibly win, to terrorize you, to disempower you, to break your ability to reason and to think, to reduce you to a state of abject terror. That's what that's about. The military objective, of course, is attached to that, because if you can make your enemy's morale completely collapse, then that is half the victory won for you. But this is the reason why. I mean, to go back to the point about the way in which this war is being waged by Hezbollah, the way in which they have operated over the past year has been working, in the sense that they are draining the US colonial state in the Middle East, known as Israel, of resources. They are, by the fact that Netanyahu and his government have been unable to meet their objectives, they are draining it of credibility. They are dividing its supporters. This is much more effective than the Dugin types would allow for. People like that demanding, and also demanding the same thing in relation to the Russian war, demanding big sweeping assaults and gigantic aerial bombardments and all that stuff, thinking that that's the way that we are going to secure victory. And of course, this is childish. They have adopted the thinking of the imperialists, because these idealist reactionaries, which is, by the way, what Dugin is, the people like that think that domination, as expressed by the imperialists, is something to follow. And thankfully, there are some in Russia who want that. Dugin clearly does, but this isn't something which the anti-imperialist forces have generally gone in for. Partly because it's a lack of technological capability, but also because the war is being fought for different reasons. A war for liberation is fought in a different way than a war for domination. Like the idealist idiots in Russia and in the West think that that you're going soft unless you level Kiev, unless you turn Lvov into a smouldering ruin. Because unfortunately, these people have become attached to the same methods of warfare as the imperialists wage, and that's not a strength; that's a weakness. The imperialists have to wage war that way precisely because their connections with their own masses are so weak and so unable to sustain a major war. The reason why the US had to move so rapidly and so quickly in their invasion of Iraq was because they had to rapidly demoralize and destroy the Iraqi army, because they couldn't have lasted in a sustained war. The will of the US population to fight in such a war would have evaporated really quickly. That's why they had to do it quick, and they had to get it over with and declare victory quickly. Anything more than what they did would have severely tested not only their own capabilities to keep that army supplied, but the will of a population to fight. That's the thing. That's the thing to bear in mind here. So again, going back to the question of Hezbollah. Hezbollah, as I said the other day, have been waging this war for a long time. They drove the Israelis out of Lebanon in a way that no Lebanese national government would have been capable of. Now it seems to me that they are needing to, or perhaps they already are, engaged in a process of needing to build what Mao describes there as a unified front against the Japanese. They need to build that without distinction of class or anything else. Build a national movement to expel, as back then, Japanese militarism. Well, now it seems to me that the Lebanese, led by Hezbollah, will need to form a national movement, which is, in many respects, as I said, this is already in place to a degree, but a national unified movement to expel or defend the country against US imperialism. First of all, in terms of defeating the aggression of the Israeli colonial forces, but the other part of that, and the part of that that will necessarily flow from this, is removing the influence of US imperialism and its proxies inside Lebanon itself. It's hard to, as the assassination of Nasrallah revealed, I think, it's hard to fight the war on the one front when you've got so many people present in the country who are willing to drive a knife into your back. That's the intelligence assets of the British, the French, the Americans, the Israelis themselves, the Saudis and others. So necessarily the defeat of the Israeli colonial state by Hezbollah and its Lebanese national allies will need to be followed with the removal of US colonial influence over Lebanon. But that's part of this struggle, and it's also part of the struggle in the wider region of West Asia as well. The struggle to remove, as Nasrallah himself correctly stated nearly a year ago, is the struggle to remove US influence from the entirety of the region. And that means also first, in fact, removing the comprador elements. So removing the comprador elements in places like Jordan, places like Egypt, the ending of the wretched and disgusting Al Saud clique in Riyadh, the ending of this iteration of the Saudi state, the Gulf states as well. All of these are the centers of US power. I am convinced that one of the reasons why the Saudis have gone into BRICS is partially to spread their bets a little bit, because the current rulers of Saudi Arabia aren't completely stupid, but also so that they can have influence in there in terms of derailing it if need be. These are still people dedicated and committed to US imperialism fundamentally. Most of their interests still flow in that direction after all. So, this is where I'll conclude the comments to say that the psychological aspect of this needs to be kept in mind at all times. The aim of the imperialists when it comes to the colonized peoples will be to divide, confuse, and demoralize at all times, to convince them of the pointlessness of resistance. But an examination of the history and the weaknesses of the imperialists over the last 100 years will reveal that, again, Mao's dictum is still true. They're still a paper tiger. If you can unite the people in Lebanon, in Iraq, in other areas of the world which are subjected to US domination, then you can not only oust them, but you can break the link with imperialism for good, which is what is necessary. It's necessary to break the link with American imperialism and European imperialism, for that matter as well, for all the reasons we've gone into before. But to finally embark on the path of independent development, which, thanks to the presence of a powerful Chinese state now, with the ability to assist in economic development projects, there are now alternative paths for development for oppressed nations. And that is a very important factor in this that wasn't there anything like as much 20 years ago. So, we will pause there for questions and comments. Thanks to all 197 of you watching. Be sure to like and share the stream if you haven't done so already. Good morning to Grassy Knoll, who joins us from very early in the morning over in Seattle, Washington. Good morning to Svetlana over in Moscow, and Jerry down in Hampshire. More Time Needed joins us from Skeggy on the English Riviera. We are also joined by Tim Gray, who joins us from a very wet Britain. More Time Needed asks about Lizardo's History and Critique of a Black Legend. I recommend it wholeheartedly. It's a very interesting work. I'd also recommend as additional reading Grover Furr's work, Khrushchev Lied, which is very detailed in terms of his thorough debunking of Khrushchev's counter-revolutionary coup speech in 1956, but also the other works by Grover Furr as well, in terms of debunking a lot of the crap that gets thrown in communist direction by the propaganda of the imperialists. Good morning, or good evening, I should say, to Robeson out in Indonesia, and to David King, and to Scott, and to Krod, and to Krasovets, and to Comrade Jawad. Also to Palawan Jungle Days, who joins us from a hot and damp Palawan in the South China Sea. Good to have you with us. Davey, good morning to you from a wet Gwynedd. And Carmo, he's joining us from Wirral, where the sun has just come out. Baba One is here joining us from rainy Lausanne in Switzerland. And T.G. Wilson is with us, as is Robert, joining us from New York City. And we also have Almir joining us from Slovenia, the once and future Yugoslavia. We also have Vera with us. And Peter joining us from perfidious Albion. Nush82 joins us from Melbourne, US annexed territory of Australia. Well, it's annexed by the British, and then the British handed it over to the US, so that's not much of an improvement. Tim Gray says, psychological warfare is being waged every day by capitalism. Every device you look at will feed back endless propaganda for capitalism, which is why children are given smartphones. And Tim is completely correct about that point. Which is why it's part of the reason why they make smartphones and tablets almost compulsory for school children these days. Getting them addicted to the propaganda early. Ken, hello to you, and Levi joins us from Adelaide, Australia, getting a lot of Australians in the early morning stream here, or shall we say mid-morning. We have Working Prole Incorporated, who is saying, hello all comrades, grinding now on construction site. Hope everybody is well. Have a good day, Working Prole. Nush82 says, do you view Masoud Pezeshkian as belonging to the Iranian comprador class? The comprador element, I think, is behind him. Some of them are. Definitely. The difficulty with analyzing the Iranian election or the Iranian candidates is that there were multiple groups behind each candidate. So yes, I think the comprador element was more behind Pezeshkian because they have been behind a lot of the so-called reformers because they desperately want to deal with the West. However, the deal that is on offer from US imperialism to Iran is total submission, which again, even some elements that have been behind Pezeshkian, some capitalist elements, that would probably be too much for them to swallow, and it would be too much for them to get away with. Because again, the revolutionary tradition in Iran is still strong amongst large elements of the masses. So this is why I say the Iranian revolution is an ongoing process. The final form is nowhere near completed yet. So yes, Pezeshkian, he, according to his own words, believed in the promises of imperialism over the with regard to the assassination of Hania, that Iran didn't respond because the imperialists were lying to them about the possibilities of a ceasefire. And again, like the number of deceptions the imperialists engage in are gigantic. I mean, it's really only in the last couple of years that I've started to fully understand this, because there's so many deceptions that they engage in. Like for the ordinary person, you can't really blame them for getting caught out because we're all caught out by it, especially those of us who grow up in the imperial core. It's less excusable for an Iranian president to be caught out by it, to be honest. I mean, I think Pezeshkian got caught out by it because he and those around him wanted to believe it. You know, takes two to lie, one to lie and one to listen. The the fact that the imperialists were obviously lying when they keep talking about a ceasefire, but this has been one long act of deception. I am absolutely convinced about this. Like all of those talks that Blinken was in with Netanyahu, etc. Again, like the imperialists would probably prefer a slightly more appealing salesman than Netanyahu, but there's nobody else in Israel who can run that place. To put it bluntly, he's an asshole, but he's the only administrator who's shown any ability to pull a government together that's lasted beyond about 5 minutes, really over the last 20 or so years. It's him. And without him in tying together Israeli politics, it becomes even more unstable, which is why the U.S., however much that the Thomas Friedman wing of the sort of the liberals, liberal Zionists might fall out with him. He's really their only bet inside Israel. So all of the talk of like talks and Biden pressuring Netanyahu and things like that, I think that's all crap. It's all crap. Like it's all designed to sow as much confusion as possible. Again, like look at what they do. Don't look at what they say. Have they ever restricted any military material going to Israel? No. Have they ever taken any serious action against the Israeli military or civilian hierarchy? No. Have they consistently defended Israel in international bodies? Yes. Have they resisted any attempts to place sanctions on Israel? Yes. And there's the truth. Fuck what they say. It's like it doesn't matter a jot what they say because this is a game. They play games constantly. They will arrange whole fake negotiation processes to cover up what they're actually doing. They have they have to do this because if they came out and said, yeah, we support a genocide, what of it? Yeah, admittedly that might arouse Ben Shapiro and Michael Rappaport, but it would damage the U.S. regime internally in a way that it needs to keep up the pretense inside the U.S. that it's some sort of arbiter in the Middle East. It never has been. Neither was British imperialism. British imperialism tried all the same tricks that the U.S. is trying now. And not just in West Asia, but in all of their colonized territories. Or it's always the same trick from the British, which is they create a conflict, they back one side of it, then they proclaim that they are the means by which that the conflict can be solved. This was what they were doing at the end of World War One by backing the Zionist project. They backed the Zionist project. They also made vague promises to the Arab leaders in Palestine at the time. They then helped create a conflict between the two of them. Then the British declared that, well, we have to be the ones to sort this out. Same tactic that the US imperialists are pursuing now, whilst relentlessly backing both the Arab compradors and the Zionists. This is the game. And Pezeshkian should know that. Because, again, I think that Khamenei knows that. Ayatollah Khamenei knows that. I think Jalili, the candidate who we would have been, Iran would have been much better off had he won, but Jalili would have told him that as well, because they had a very long meeting just after Pezeshkian won. But Pezeshkian believed the stories about peace because, again, he wanted to, and those around him wanted to. But the thing you have to realize is that the stakes for imperialism are so high with regard to West Asia that there's no lie that they won't tell. There's no deception they won't be engaged in. What they've done now, though, is that they've made a mistake in that they've publicly humiliated the Iranian political leadership. Not Khamenei, because he would have known the truth, but Pezeshkian. They've publicly humiliated Pezeshkian and his government. They've made them look weak, and they've made them look as if they are suckers, which is now going to generate a backlash, because the opinion of the strong pro-revolution, anti-imperialist elements in Iran will be very angered by this, and what that leads to in terms of pressure on the Iranian government from the Iranian masses is going to be very interesting to see. I think that where this will probably evolve the situation inside Iran to ultimately make the line that the Iranians take stronger, because there's a lot of moving pieces here. You've got the fact that the economic linkage between China and Iran and Russia and Iran has been growing really rapidly over the last couple of years. And this is now reaching the point where that process is becoming irreversible. What needs to be done, though, as a next stage, I think, in this evolution in Iran, is that there needs to be a point reached where the attempts to make nice with the West are abandoned. And that will take a struggle inside Iran itself, because there are various pro-Western elements which need to be politically defeated, or at least sidelined, because the way of development is now going to be with the alliance with the Chinese and the Russians in particular. It's not economic development never comes from the West for oppressed nations or nations that have been subject to oppression. Only thing that comes from the West is looting, leeching, vampire-like behavior. Again, you invite them in, you invite only trouble. But this is my rather long way of answering Nushi's question. We'll have to see what happens with Pezeshkian. I mean, Pezeshkian is not a man who is acting alone. He's within a wider political system. The Iranian masses will have their say as well, and I'm confident that the balance of forces in Iran will take it in the right direction. His election complicates things, but it doesn't change the direction of travel. It won't in the end. Well, and also Mishustin, the Russian Prime Minister, was in Tehran yesterday. So we'll see what that turns into. T.G. Wilson says, it's Anglo-settler colonial from supremacist upstarts attacking the oldest contiguous civilizations in West Asia, including Yemen, Iran, and Syria. True. Imperialism needs division, says David King. That's true. Good evening to Bob, who joins us from the increasingly repressive US vassal state of Australia. Yep. Bruce says, looks like 3-year rule is coming into force in Ukraine war, also with gradual disintegration. Yeah. Certainly that seems to be the case. Yes, it seems that Ugledar in South Donetsk has fallen. This has been reported by Russian sources yesterday. More on that in our Ukraine war update tomorrow. Greetings to Cobb Fan, who joins us from Western Australia. It seems that this is a popular time of the day for our Australian brethren. Maybe we could do this more regularly. Greetings to Lee in Beijing on the 75th anniversary of the revolution. So this is between 10 or 11 is a good time to catch those of you on the other side of the world then. I'll have to bear this in mind. Nikki Const, hello to you. James Cook, greetings to you. Thanks for the title, but I am unworthy of the comparison with the great Fidel. Imperialists, through their greed, have shot themselves in the foot. Yes, capitalism destroys itself. Capitalism cuts the ground out from under itself constantly. That's one of its essential rules. Penguin says the battleground is between our ears. All we have to do is believe. Well, belief is understanding is the first part. Then from understanding comes further education, and from that, as part of that, comes organization. But knowing that you're being spun a line of shit is the first step. Penguin says, what I don't understand is China is their enemy, yet American consumption is behind the growth of China. So America must have seen it coming. It's a good question from Penguin. What you got to bear in mind about China and the American involvement there is that the US did have a strategy. The strategy which wasn't too stupid if you look at it. Like, why did Clinton grope? Why did Clinton grope anything? Look at Bill's record in Arkansas, and you might find some answers. Why did Clinton grant, I meant to say, China most favored nation status? Because they did have a strategy. That was that they looked at the pro-capitalist elements within the CPC, and thought, well, we can work by increasing our trade ties and by outsourcing some production to China, getting more of our imports from China, tying China to us as our workshop, basically. We can encourage the growth of comprador elements in China, whose interests, again, going back to what a comprador is, whose interests are tied to positive relations and growing relations with imperialism. And of course, this was very profitable for the US imperialists. It's part of the way in which imperialism works, that it deindustrializes and exports capital, not commodities anymore. And as part of that, their strategy with China was to, again, encourage the growth of a comprador element. And they thought they were succeeding, and had good reason to believe they were succeeding in the later 90s into the early 2000s. In the Yang Zemin and the Hu Jintao period, I think in particular, a lot of compradors did grow up inside China. Comprador elements increased their power in the CPC, and the US and the British gained an awful lot of intelligence assets inside China as a result. Now, that took a turn with the Xi Jinping period. And one of the things that Xi Jinping and those close to him, who gained the leadership over a decade ago now, and this is a guiding principle that Xi reflects constantly in all of his writings and all of his speeches. I mean, when it comes to dealing with the questions of the party and the organization of the state, the strengthening of the party and the strengthening of the state against being subordinated by imperialism is a constant concern. They don't put it quite that way, but if you look at Xi's record, reinforcing the ideological strength of the party and also purging the party of corruption. I mean, this is what the anti-corruption drive is about. It is about expelling, jailing, and so in some cases executing the worst elements that grew up under the Yang Zemin and Hu Jintao period. That's why an awful lot of officials got dismissed from their post. It's why you have a continual process of dismissal of high-ranking officials who have compromised themselves. So you have the former foreign minister got dismissed quite quickly when it was found that he was compromised. The former defense minister was accused of corruption and was dismissed and arrested. I mean, you never get that in this country. In fact, the more corrupt you are, the more promotions you get. So what's gone on is that the American gamble on growing a comprador element within China that would then be powerful enough to move for full capitalist restoration and therefore for full subordination of China under US power, which is what they were hoping for. That plan, whilst it went a certain way towards being successful, was thwarted. And this is the reason why they're so obsessed and they hate Xi Jinping so much, because they associate him with the defeat of those plans. Robeson says a recent study found that not only are Aboriginal incarceration rates much higher than the general Australian population, but that Indigenous women represent 34% of the total number of inmates. Is that the total number of inmates as a whole? Not just the, well, I suppose, yes, it must be. That's an astonishingly high number. I mean, the treatment of the native population in Australia, I think, is, I mean, in all of the Anglo colonies, Canada, Australia, especially, and of course the United States, it's always been bad. I think in New Zealand it was meant to be slightly better. I think because the Maoris inflicted military damage on the British back in the day, that the deals they got were slightly better. But in Australia, it's consistently horrific. Most certainly it is. I could probably do something on that in the near future, in fact. Hello to Cobb Fan, glad you're enjoying the program. T.G. Wilson gives us a quote from Ho Chi Minh, which reads as follows: "Step by step along the struggle, by studying Marxism-Leninism parallel with participating in practical activities, I gradually came upon the fact that only socialism and communism can liberate the oppressed nations and the working people throughout the world from slavery." Ho Chi Minh. Excellent quote. Is there any tactical or geographical advantage to taking southern Lebanon? I mean, something like Golan Heights is a strategic location. What they want to achieve in southern Lebanon is the wiping out of Hezbollah's presence there. That's what they want to do. The US, that is. They won't be able to do it. And if they try to stage some sort of invasion through the Golan Heights or something like that, it's only going to get the colonial regime of Israel in even more trouble. But the objective is to wipe out Hezbollah. What they really want to do is to wipe out Hezbollah as both a military and a political force. That's what they want to do. They won't be able to do that, though. When do you think psychological warfare began? The moment the Roman Catholic Church was founded. That's a slightly flippant answer to Svetlana's question. It's always been there. I mean, half of the history of the Christian churches in the West has been about convincing the peasantry of the superiority of the aristocracy. In the modern era, it has become more intense because there's so many different, because the literacy of the population increased, because the capability of the population of applying their inborn human reason to analyzing their situation increased. The level of psychological operations under capitalism has had to dramatically increase, especially in the imperial core countries. So psychological warfare is as old as the hills. I mean, it's even talked about in the ancient Chinese texts. But in its modern form, I would say it's probably something which comes about in the early 20th century, I would say. And it intensifies after the October Revolution of 1917. It really intensifies after that in the imperialist countries because they have to manage then a very difficult situation for themselves involving huge proletarian populations which they need to keep divided and confused and weak. And psychological warfare upon your own population is one of the ways in which you do that. Also, that's behind what in post-World War II terms, it's the reason why you run Operation Gladio in Italy. It's the reason why you have the counterintelligence and stay-behind army operations. It's why I insist that Gladio operations, whilst some of them were targeted at the Soviet Union, without doubt, the principal targets of Gladio operations in Europe and the United States was not the Soviet Union, it was the domestic working class. And only when we finally overthrow the capitalist class will we find out the true extent of these operations. But I think that we will find eventually that they are massive, and we will find that the capitalist class and their state forces will be implicated in a gigantic number of crimes committed against the working class populations of the imperial core countries, especially the United States. I think that if you dug into all the psychological and real warfare waged by U.S. state agencies against the U.S. working class, it would be if you wrote that all down in a book, the book would have to be about 20,000 pages long, because I think it's immense. It covers a lot of the major events and crimes of the mid to late 20th century, and I think it's ongoing to this day. Yes, and the Grassy Knoll observes Hollywood is part of it. Hello to Char Paul, who joins us on Rumble. Yes, we are live up on Rumble. Be sure to head over there and join the party, just in case YouTube stream gets nixed. IRB Fenian asks, if Hezbollah tried to oust US colonial influence in Lebanon right now, could that just restart the civil war with the Phalangists? It's probably the reason why they're moving slowly. I mean, they've been moving to try and form like a national bloc inside Lebanon to counter imperial influence for years now. And yes, the comprador element and the fascist element is still there. This is the reason why I think the Hezbollah leaders always moved cautiously. But you're reaching a point now where they'll have to try and like form at least a clear defensive popular front against US imperialism. And given the fact that most of the Lebanese population wants the end of the domination of their country, like the power of the Phalangists, I think, has declined over the years. They're still there and they can still cause problems, but I think that they're weaker now than they have been before. Yeah, and I think also with regard to the Lebanese army, even though it's dominated by officers trained by the West and it's kept weak for this reason, there'll be many within it, even in the officer corps, who reject the domination of imperialism. So I think there's a greater strength to the anti-imperialist forces inside Lebanon now than there probably was even 20 years ago. Tom Jode, hello to you. Glad you're enjoying the content on the channel. Hello to Littlestone. Svetlana says, Dugan is not stupid. It would be better if he were. No, he's not stupid. He's a manipulator. He's highly intelligent, which makes him dangerous. There are enough people in Russia impressed by his cloud cuckoo land gobbledygook. Yeah, you examine Dugin's so-called philosophy, and like it's gibberish when it comes down to it. But like all irrational philosophers, going back to like people like Schopenhauer or people like Nietzsche, it's emotional. It's very impressively written in some respects. I mean, it probably loses something in the translation, but looking at Dugin's translations in English, they're very dramatic sounding. You can get carried along with this kind of like irrationalism, and especially because he loves his apocalyptic visions, and and that has a certain appeal to, I think, certain elements within the Russian bourgeois who are not compradors but regard themselves as nationalists. Dugin's gibberish has a certain appeal. Doesn't stand up to a consistent Marxist analysis at all. But then again, these people are anti-communist, so it doesn't need to. But yes, Svetlana's point is correct. Just scrolling through here. Very laughable here in Australia today. Many politicians, this is from Cobfan, expressed outrage that some anti-Zionist protesters were waving the quote-unquote terrorist flag of Hezbollah while supporting the real terrorists. Well, every expression of rage from the imperialists is a confession. When they say that they are, when they say they don't negotiate with terrorists, what that actually means is that they are the terrorists and that no one should negotiate with them. That's the way to view that. They are the ones who support terror. They're the ones who support indiscriminate bombing of civilians. They're the ones who support mass slaughter in order to obtain their economic and political objectives. I always reverse their words, and therefore you will find the truth. To answer David King's point, Iran's already got a military alliance with the Russians, I think. Yeah, they've signed a military alliance with the Russians. There's a tacit one with the Chinese as well, in that the Chinese have issued warnings to the US imperialists before that they will not accept Iran's territorial integrity being violated. So there is already a coherent alliance there. Just scrolling through the comments here, we're going to have to bring things to a close in a moment. Morgan Baker says, did he put his guests through psychological warfare? No doubt. Oh, yeah. I mean, Sean Coombs, that's his real name. Well, we could probably do a whole hour on that guy, but Nick Bryant's YouTube channel has a good summary of the case. I would recommend people watch that. This guy, I think this guy's been an asset of various different state forces inside the United States for a long, long time. He apparently had the cops in, I think, New York and Florida at his beck and call for a while. He's clearly got some association with the FBI. Guy's a scumbag, complete scumbag. I mean, even if you put aside all the weird sexual stuff, he's a thief. I mean, it's well known in like music circles that the guy's a thief. He steals royalties from artists all the time. He's in bed with various different. I mean, Nick Bryant's video on this is good for going through the various characters involved in Sean Coombs' career. But he's been associated with like organized crime type figures and like the feds for a very long time. It seems that the FBI finally acted to basically arrest him because there were other lawsuits being brought against him, civil lawsuits that could have perhaps revealed certain involvements that he'd had with them. So they moved first to basically charge him with things he has manifestly and obviously done, to get out ahead of the game, so to speak, and so that they could define the narrative. And Bryant's video also has some interesting information on who the prosecutor is, who's behind all of this, and it's clearly a stitch-up job to try and limit the damage that's going to come out about this guy. But I mean, there's going to be so many others who are implicated in like the music business, and this goes to go back to the point about psychological warfare, which Morgan is correct to put out there. Music business, films, all of this culture, the culture industry, to use that term. This is all part of the psychological warfare. It's all used to instill like bullshit value systems in people, to convince them that socially destructive, immoral, amoral behavior is good. I mean, this is why do you think that the American state has been, in essence, pushing the idea of like the so-called gangster rap genre that Diddy is associated with? Well, I mean, forget all the denunciations of from Christian preachers about gangster rap and all that kind of shit. Look at what's actually been pushed and through Hollywood, through the wider culture industry, like socially destructive, should we say, psychotic behavior has been pushed by the music industry for years. Why? This is a psychological warfare game. It's designed to keep people as alienated and as baffled and as divided from each other as possible, and to promote antisocial behavior through culture. Especially this goes back to Tim Gray's point about targeting young people. If you can encourage, I mean, we had this growing up. I mean, I grew up in the 90s. That was my teenage years. Late 90s, early 2000s was when I was sort of listening to this stuff. Like, you encourage a debased view of human relationships. You encourage a debased view of the relationship between men and women. You encourage a very negative view and destructive view of human sexuality. You encourage drug use. You encourage extreme consumption of narcotics and alcohol. You encourage you encourage a worship of the image of the gangster. And this doesn't just go for the gangster rap genre. It goes much wider than that. I mean, you grow up in British culture, white British culture even, in the 90s, and the worship of the gangster was a very real thing. It still is to this day. Why do you think there's so many fucking movies about them? I mean, some of them are good. Like some of them, Long Good Friday is a good movie. Get Carter is a good movie, because they're ultimately about the hollowness and brutalities of organized crime. But there's many, many more, like fucking Guy Ritchie's entire genre, his entire movie-making genre, is glorification of organized crime. Now, organized crime, and this goes back to psychological warfare, gladio operations, etc. Organized crime has always been denounced by politicians, but is in reality in business with secret services, intelligence networks, etc. Organized crime was part of the gladio operations in Italy. This is established fact. Same is true in the United States. Organized crime's been in bed with the intelligence services for over 70 odd years, probably longer. Same will be true in Britain as well. And then we get back to the cultural side of it, and you see, well, why are they glorifying the figure of the gangster who operates as a sort of miniature form of a microcosm of capitalism, ruthless, amoral, constantly breaking through boundaries, constantly transgressing. This is the kind of thing that they want you to grow up believing in, want you to grow up thinking that you want to be. And whether you consciously think you want to be that way or not, these things leave an imprint on the mind and on the consciousness. And this is the reason why they promote all of this stuff. Krasovet says, Bulgaria is on its 7th election in 2.5 years. Far right are gaining ground whilst the left is trying to remodel itself. Well, the right are the only ones. The reason why the right are gaining ground is because they're the ones who realised, and some of them at least, that the defying the EU in the case of the European countries would be a good vote winner. The left, because it's basically just the left of the bourgeois, is completely married to the EU, to NATO, and to the other imperialist institutions, because the left is not a working class left. Lino says, my biggest flex is that I have the same surname as Fidel. Well, congratulations to you, Senor Castro. The average sentence handed down to those who refuse to fight for the Kiev regime is now 3 years in prison. More and more are choosing prison over going to the front. I wouldn't be surprised if they just send people straight to the front rather than prison. In fact, I'm surprised they haven't done that already. Is there anyone else here from the Badlands of North Dakota or a Montana neighbor? Asks one commenter. Well, let them connect with each other if you need to in the chat. And as always, be sure to join the Telegram group. We have a very active discussion going on over there. T.G. Wilson says, just rewatched a classic of Parenti on Yugoslavia. During it, he quoted a woman saying, George H.W. Bush reminds every woman of her first husband. Yes, well, this is the George H.W. Bush who reportedly took his mistress with him when he was ambassador to China and not his wife. Svetlana says, I know for a fact that prisons are jam-packed in Nikolaev with so-called political prisoners. Very seems correct to me, given what we know about what's been going on there and how repressive the Kiev regime is. David King says, Australia is not so hidden history. They exterminated the native Tasmanians. Well, that was another great crime of the British. Another crime that the British don't want to talk about anymore, surprisingly enough. T.G. Wilson says Ho Chi Minh was briefly in Hoboken, New Jersey, when he was around 21 years old in 1911 to 1912. Seeing the state of the dock workers there was what convinced him of the need for communism, apparently. Oh, and apparently there is a dock workers strike coming up in the United States. More on that when I have researched into it. Nikki Const says, when all is exposed, 98% of Washington will fall. Julian Assange has said that. Well, look, if we're going to get into all the dirty shit that the American state has done since World War II, forget overseas for a moment. Just look at all the stuff that you can, and again, like look at Nick Bryant's work or Whitney Webb's work, and you've got bits of it there. But you find out like the true extent of like the evil, and there's no other word for it, that the U.S. state machine has engaged in upon and has visited upon its own population. There'll be, I mean, that will fill volume after volume of criminality, and you would need to arrest every single person who is a member of Congress or who has worked in the White House or who has been in any way engaged in work for a federal law enforcement agency or a state law enforcement agency. There's so much there. I mean, this is the reason why, like, America is the heart of imperialism, and so to keep itself secure from on the home front, especially since it stopped being able to offer reforms, I think the state forces there consistently practice terror against their own population. No doubt about it. I'm not just talking like, Gladio style false flag attacks or something like that. I think other stuff is engaged in this. They engage in other things as well. The consistent collaboration with organized crime being one of them. The encouragement of drug racketeering being another. But then you go further than that and you see other things as well, such as involvement with the strange incidents around the activities of various serial killers, for instance, potential state involvement at some level in that, or at least in terms of the state acting to cover up involvement that their agents might have had with serial killers, with networks of child traffickers, with mass murderers of all varieties, all stemming from intelligence-related operations. And again, like, you don't need to go that far to find some of these truths out. Even like something like the Charles Manson murders, as chronicled in the book by Tom O'Neill, Chaos. Like, you can draw a direct line from Charles Manson to like the MK Ultra experiments. Isn't that hard? They were Manson at some certain points clearly had psychological experiments conducted on him before he started his killing sprees, or he recruited the family to start his killing sprees. O'Neill manages to prove that in Chaos. And he was attending a fake clinic in the Haight-Ashbury region, area of San Francisco in the late 60s, which was being run ultimately by Jolyon West, the CIA's MK Ultra psychiatrist, who was there to conduct experiments on hippies in the usage of acid, LSD, as a form of societal control. Again, this is all stuff that you could find. This was in Jolyon West's own archive that Tom O'Neill, the writer, dug out and put in the book Chaos. So again, like, that's a slice. That's one particularly famous group of murders which you can track to U.S. state involvement with the killer, or the man who went to prison for the killings, even though apparently he didn't do any of them, or didn't do most of them himself. So that's one small element of it. But you think of like, and it's more, and again, like, start digging into the serial killer question in the United States. Like, I recently started reading the book Programmed to Kill by Dave McGowan, and like, there's so many of the big time, big name serial killers in the United States in the 60s and the 70s who'd either been in US Special Forces, some of whom had been active in, possibly active in the Phoenix program, which is essentially serial killer operations as applied to the entirety of Vietnam, or who had been in the U.S. Marine Corps, or who had links with the U.S. intelligence operations, or who'd been through the prison system and had been subjected to psychological manipulations, shall we say, and it could be proved that they had. Like, when you start digging into that, and the full truth will come out in the end. When the US ruling class falls, the full truth, or as much of it as can be rescued from the computer systems that they will try and destroy on their way out, the full truth of what they've done to the domestic US population will be revealed. And it will be a horror to behold, I am sure. Speaking of PSYOPs, says T.G. Wilson, Arthur Hayes Salzberger had a confidential deal with the CIA from 1935 to 1961 to run their stores and editorialize as they see fit. Salzberger, weren't they the family that ran the Washington Post? Correct me if I'm wrong. Vera says, Dugan talking for an hour, but you will remember nothing. Yeah, well, pretty much the same as Zizek then. T.G. Wilson says, the millenarianism is an important part of European history. The eschatology of Dugan is an example. The Montana 2nd century AD, the Crusades, Jehovah's Witnesses, etc., all millenarian, believing in some radical sudden change. Yeah, this is the eschatological view of like people like Dugan, who view the apocalypse not in it's not in literal terms, but in this one gigantic blast that will sort of sweep things clear, and things will be remodeled as they see fit. That is very much an anti-communist, anti-Marxist point of view, because again, we know from the insights of Stalin and Mao and Kim Il Sung that the grand sweep away of the old and the blank slate that the new will be drawn upon. This doesn't exist. This doesn't exist. This is a myth. And if you try and create that, you can only do it by extreme violence and extreme depravity. I mean, we go back to the psychological manipulation part of it. One of the obsessions of people like Dr. Jolyon West, the CIA psychiatrist, the guy who ran, or was part of, along with Sidney Gottlieb, the guys who ran the MK Ultra experiments, was the idea that you could completely rewrite a person, psychologically speaking. And the idea of a swept clean and started all over again, rebuilding a personality from the ground upwards, that's been one of their obsessions for decades, and going back probably over 100 years. Certainly since the age of where they had to concede the vote to the working class, where they had to drop property qualifications, where the level of literacy of the working class improved. They had to engage in all manner of insane psychological ploys and plans to try and manipulate people. So it's no surprise that something like MK Ultra came along, where they found, apparently, they thought the wonder drug in the form of LSD, where they could like dose people with it and then engage in essentially hypnosis to try and rewire them. This is what they did. Again, this is all on record. This is all proven to have done this to varying degrees of success. I mean, they damaged a lot of people. I mean, the Unabomber, Fyodor Kaczynski, was a guy who'd gone through MK Ultra experiments before he became the Unabomber. So they're interested, and they've always been fascinated with the idea that they can rewrite people. That they, and this goes back to the eschatological moment. And Dugin and people like that believe that on like a societal wide level, that they can have these big bangs and everything will be swept clear of the past, and they can rebuild as they see fit. It's a myth. You can't do that. You can't just, I mean, some on the left believe this as well. You can't just sweep human beings clear of all the legacies of the past. If the 20th century socialist experiments and have shown us anything, is that to get rid of the tendencies towards the surrender to hierarchy and trusting the experts and believing in the leadership of the intellectual class and things like that, all the things that got the Soviet Union into so much trouble, with regard to all the things that fueled revisionism, that is not something you can just sweep clean, or something that will just come right if you get the material conditions correct. Again, it takes to remove those damaging tendencies of the past. Actually takes long-term, consistent struggle on an ideological level, along with development on a material level. and the two need to run alongside each other. And only that way can human beings be liberated from the tendencies towards the negative hierarchies based around the defense of private property in the past. Mopping the Moon says Maddow is a Rhodes Scholar. Well, that doesn't say much for the Rhodes Scholarship Program, does it? Direct tie to the Council of Foreign Relations. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of them are. Zizek the Clown says Cobb fan. That's true. Well, Zizek is an anti-communist buffoon. Hello to Morgan, who joined us. Alexandros says it's no surprise that West imperialist governments encourage the promotion of gangsters. Similarly, it's no accident that triads stopped functioning not long after the handover of Hong Kong to the PRC. Yeah, I think the triads were always in league with the British imperialists. Imperialism and organized crime go alongside each other. Gangster rap promoted to generate inmates for private prisons. Lyor Cohen behind it, says Michael. T.G. Wilson says they had prostitutes give acid to Johns and filmed it as part of MK Ultra. Tom Joad says LSD was tested on US soldiers. They threw down their weapons, so acid had to be demonized. Yeah, I don't buy that. They fed acid to people who also became violent. This idea that acid means peace and love, this isn't true. It acts as an accelerant. And the US found a way to basically encourage violent tendencies on people, partially through dosing them with acid to making them more suggestible. It's O'Neill's book is flawed on in quite a few ways, but one of the ways in which O'Neill's thesis falls apart is that he thinks that the CIA and others got together to demonize the hippies, and this is might have been one of the reasons why they sponsored the development of the Manson family. The truth is that the hippies and the drug-taking culture of the 60s itself was a degenerate mess that was encouraged by the US ruling class to make sure that people dosed themselves up to oblivion, to anesthetize themselves, basically. Drugs are a trap laid there. Narcotics are a trap laid there for us by the imperialists. Why do you think the British were in the opium trade for so long? Why do you think they literally were the biggest drug dealers on the planet? The US took that title over. Like there's an opioid crisis in the United States because the US ruling class made it an opioid crisis. They used Afghanistan as a mass manufacturer for the base ingredients for it, just as they did a generation before with the what was it called, the Golden Triangle operation in Vietnam and Thailand. Like, narcotics are promoted by the ruling class. They always have been. Some people on the left, foolishly, idiotically, and this I criticize myself as much for this as I do anybody, because I believed this for a while. Thought that narcotics was a way of freeing the mind. It isn't. It really isn't. It's a way of anesthetizing yourself, of putting a layer of cotton wool between you and the world. It's foolish, and the sooner you can free yourself of it and free yourself of that kind of bourgeois thinking, the better. Sean says there was a British soldier operating in Northern Ireland who had the same MO as the Yorkshire Ripper. Yeah, that's true. Well, there's various theories on the old Peter Sutcliffe, who, by the way, was visited in prison by a certain Sir Jimmy Savile. Just two Yorkshire boys hanging out and having fun. I mean, there's always been speculation with a lot of serial killers that, like, the number of killings attributed to them that they didn't actually do. They might have done some of them, but that the cops just loaded, like, all the unsolved murders they possibly could onto one guy and said it was him. There's always been speculation that the Sutcliffe didn't do all the things he was accused of. Same for various killers inside the United States, that, like, useless or corrupt cops just piled killings on various different characters and said, oh, they did them all. When in reality, the story was a lot more murky. G.G. Wilson says serial killing in the US really kicked off the massive space. That's true. Hello to Jessica, who's enjoying the stream. Glad that you are. Hello to Yepex. Salzberger was running the NYT, not Washington Post. Okay, thanks for the correction. Israeli colony could be a psyop to create a colony with bloodthirsty maniacs. Colonialism creates bloodthirsty maniacs just as a matter of course. I mean, Fanon is very, very clear upon that point. That's an essential understanding. Nearly half the murders in the US aren't proven, says comma Entrepo. Heroin flooded my city in Britain until the US left Afghanistan. Funny that, says Krasovets. Yeah. Ash says, jumped in just in time for serial killer talk. Program to Chill podcast. A really good series on serial killers and intelligence operations. Yeah. Thanks to Ash for recommending the Program to Chill podcast, which I believe has ceased now. But they did a lot of stuff on serial killers and the intelligence networks that they were linked to. So I'd recommend that. You can find it on Spotify. I think the guy who did it, Jimmy Falun Gong, I think he's retired now from podcasting. But yeah, they did 2 years of some really excellent stuff, pointing out the link. I think the guy was either a Marxist or was sort of influenced by Marxism, so he wasn't doing the Alex Jones thing. He was pointing out the material reality that so many serial killers have links to either the intelligence services or members of the ruling class, and that for a lot of like bizarre shit that goes on that like the likes of Alex Jones do go on about, like the Bohemian Grove stuff, like the the satanic panic shit in the 80s. Like a lot of that is based on real things. So like they condemned the people who claimed that Satanists were sacrificing people in the woods and shit like that. Whereas in actual fact, like the ruling class, not just in the United States, but Britain too, France, all the imperialist countries certainly, are into some really weird shit. Like it's not just Freemasonry's part of it. Like secret societies, weird sex cult shit. That's all out there. It's all documented within the ruling class that there's people who are into this kind of stuff. Like the British ruling class are fucking notorious, and rightly so, for their engagement in, shall we say, very, very illegal activities involving children. That the British ruling class have a reputation as being like paedophiles en masse. That's because a lot of them are. The American ruling class similarly. Like the position of the ruling class, being a tiny minority, promotes certain views. I mean, the ruling class came into the world as the promoters of rationality, to a degree. But their rule, after they got confronted with the contradictions posed by having created their own gravediggers in the form of the proletariat, their rule increasingly becomes dependent upon, again, we were talking before about psychological operations and manipulation, but their rule, they become obsessed with hierarchy. They become obsessed with keeping the closed circle, keeping the working class down. And so their position lends them to be sympathetic towards and start engaging in all kinds of weird shit that reinforces hierarchies or keeps their positions intact. So like the ruling class become obsessed with secret societies and being members of secret societies to keep their connections close, to give them areas where they can speak without the prying eyes of the working class upon them. That's a big reason why secret societies explode in the United States and Britain, is because they're areas where the bourgeois can be free about their discussions. And as part of the binding rituals they engage in, they do all kinds of weird shit, some of which is just laughable, like, Masons dressing funny and rolling their trouser legs up and having a funny handshake. Some of which is really fucking bizarre, some of which is criminal shit involving rape, murder, all kinds of stuff, which is then linked back to organized crime, drug trafficking networks, intelligence operations. Again, all stuff that can be proved if you know where the right sources to look into. Penguin says, I think they might think that because they do so. Oh, this is from a question from Ash. Do you think the bourgeois become obsessed with the occult, especially if they think they deserve their place? Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm getting at here. Like, the Nazis were like the most obvious form of this because they were the most extreme form of bourgeois rule at the time. But they become obsessed with the occult and they become obsessed with souls and bloodlines and IQ and like the idea that like they adopted like social Darwinism and eugenics and all that kind of reactionary crap because it was all based around the idea that they deserve their position by, you know, bloodlines. They deserve to be where they are because they are somehow either scientifically, in inverted commas, superior to the proletariat and certainly to the masses of the colonized nations, and through superior bloodlines that they are superior, or through superior spiritual essences. So, like, if you're trying to justify why, like, you know, barely 1% of the population can dominate the wealth of an entire nation, then you are going to start engaging in all kinds of absurd and bizarre shit, which is what they get obsessed with, and start engaging in absurd and bizarre shit to justify your position to yourself, principally. But also, again, to, I think these secret societies and these bizarre things they engage in are part of what promotes them, part of why they're so popular with the bourgeois, is because, again, it gives them places they can go away from the prying eyes of the working class. And so, and if it does come out, then you make sure it comes out via Alex Jones or some lunatic who's gibbering about aliens on the Joe Rogan podcast. Whereas the actual truth is both more horrifying and more mundane. More mundane in the sense that secret societies are there to plot and scheme in secret and to bind the ruling class together in greater loyalty to each other. And they're partly there to like also mystify bourgeois rule, to cover it up, to cover it in these like absurd rituals. So again, it can look as if again, a psychological operation they're also running on themselves, so that they believe that they're meant to be there by some kind of mystical divination or superior bloodlines or any of the other shit that they want to talk. And yes, Cobb fans, Starmer did protect Jimmy Saviles when he was director of public prosecutions. Tom Jones says, wasn't Edward Heath a Satanist? I hadn't heard that. Possible, though. Possible. The English elites are also very precious with language, too. How you pronounce street names like Cadogan Street. Let them know if you're an interloper or not. It's like a secret coded language. Very true. Ash says, the right wing keep pointing out the elites, and especially Hollywood, are devil worshippers and show it through their art. It's degeneracy, but also I can see what the right mean. Yeah, the thing about the right wingers is that their real complaint about Hollywood is that the Hollywood elites aren't on their side. That's what it comes down to. And also, like, the right wingers have their own like satanic paedophile elite. They just express it. They're just in a slightly different section of the ruling class. Like, you look into like right wingers scandals, like it's less to do with like actors and celebrities and more to do with like industrialists and businessmen and politicians. And yeah, it's a slightly different set of scandals. But because you've got two elements in the ruling class in the United States who are sort of squabbling and fighting with each other, each will then reveal elements of the other's dirt out in public, which makes it useful for us in a way. Carduggin is how the elites say that one. Well, glad I failed the test there. All right, so we are coming up towards the 1 o'clock mark here, so I'm going to draw things to a close for this stream. I'll be back again with an analysis of Stalin's work at the 14th Party Congress at 7:45 this evening, and I will be talking more about that then. So until then, thanks to all 265 of you who have tuned in. Thanks to everybody who supports the show on Patreon. The audio of this episode will be up there later today. If you want to support the program, go over to Patreon, go onto the Buy Me a Coffee link. Thanks to everybody who does so. I'll be back again later on today. But until then, good day to you, and hope you enjoy the rest of it.